Ilara's back ached, her feet screamed, and her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was only 32, but working 3 straight shifts at Restaurant Bellagio in Florence felt like being 90. Her deep mahogany skin, usually glowing, was now tight with exhaustion, and the tight coils of her box braids felt heavy on her head. Her simple, faded olive green dress, the only thing she felt comfortable in, was starting to stick to her back in the warm, tense air of the expensive restaurant. She wasn't serving just anyone tonight. She was on the elite floor, the one only used for people who spent more on appetizers than Ilara made in a year. The room smelled of polished wood, white lilies, and money, a heavy, suffocating smell that reminded her exactly where she belonged and where she didn't. Ilara was a clever woman, sharp with numbers and quick with languages, but here, she was just the help. She needed the tips to pay for her aging grandfather's medicine back in the States. He was the reason she endured this kind of stress. Her main focus was Table 7, tucked away in the deepest corner. It was an island of silent, powerful men, led by a man everyone in the building called by only one name, Alessandro. Alessandro Vitriani was a presence that stole the air right out of the room. He was a man in his late 30s, and everything about him whispered of control. His skin was smooth, flawless olive, and his dark hair was perfectly combed back, not a single strand out of place. But it was his eyes that truly terrified people, a pale, piercing silver gray that seemed to look right through you and find your weakest point. He wore a charcoal gray suit that didn't just fit him, it looked like it had been molded around his power. A single, heavy platinum ring caught the dim light as he occasionally shifted his hand. He didn't shout or wave for attention, he simply existed, and the world adjusted around him. Ilara knew the whispered warnings. This man wasn't just wealthy, he was the head of a massive, untouchable organization. He handled problems that regular police forces couldn't even touch, and his influence spread like ivy across Italy and beyond. He was feared because his power wasn't loud, it was icy and absolute. To anger him was to invite a silence that would swallow your life whole. Her current task was moving a large, heavy bottle of expensive, deep red Tuscan wine from the serving table to his VIP table. The floor was slippery from a previous cleaning mistake. Ilara knew she should have asked for help, but the head waiter, Marco, had only glared at her. She took a deep breath, trying to slow her heart. Just 3 more steps, Ilara. Just 3 more steps. As she reached the edge of the table, a junior waiter, flustered and rushing, came flying around the corner, his head down. There was no time to think, no time to cry out. A solid impact. The heavy wine bottle flew from Ilara's damp, sweaty grasp. Time seemed to slow down. She watched, horrified, as the dark, thick crimson liquid arched through the air in a terrifying slow-motion arc. It didn't just land on the table. It splashed directly onto the shoulder and pristine white silk shirt of Alessandro Vitriani. The silence that followed was so deep it felt like the entire world had stopped breathing. The light-hearted chatter from the neighboring tables evaporated instantly. The tinkle of cutlery stopped. Everyone in the restaurant, from the chefs in the back to the customers in the front, was suddenly focused on Table 7. Ilara froze, the air knocked out of her lungs. The sight of the deep red stain blossoming across the Don's flawless gray suit was like watching a life sentence being signed. Her mind didn't form words, it just screamed. Alessandro didn't jump. He didn't even flinch. He remained perfectly still, a sculpture of terrifying composure. Slowly, deliberately, he placed the small silver fork he'd been holding down on his plate. The faint clink sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet. Then, his silver-gray eyes lifted and locked onto Ilara's face. I am so sorry, sir," Ilara stammered, her voice a thin, reedy squeak of terror. Hot tears instantly welled up in her deep brown eyes, mixing with the sweat on her cheek. "It was an accident. I didn't see him." She couldn't finish the sentence. The sheer, overwhelming cold radiating from Alessandro was paralyzing. His silence was louder than any scream. His 3 associates, who looked like walking granite statues, all shifted simultaneously, their hands moving subtly, creating an atmosphere of immediate, crushing danger. Alessandro slowly dipped a stark white napkin into his water glass. He didn't look at the stain on his shoulder. He kept his eyes fixed on Ilara, holding her hostage in his terrifying gaze. He dabbed the water, a gesture so calm and careful it only made the tension worse. Finally, he spoke. His voice was not a roar of fury, but a low, smooth baritone, so quiet that Elara had to lean in to hear him. It was a voice used to being obeyed, not questioned. "The apologies are irrelevant, Miss Jenkins," he said, using her last name, meaning he had already known who she was, which sent a fresh wave of panic through her. "The value of this suit is quantifiable. The stain on my evening is less so." He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. The movement drew the fabric tight over the dark stain, emphasizing her terrible mistake. "Tell me, Miss Jenkins, how much do you make in a month here?" Elara swallowed hard, tasting pure fear. "About €1,000, sir, with tips." "And your family situation?" he pressed, his expression unchanging. "You send money back to the States for a relative, yes? Medical needs?" Elara could only nod, tears now openly streaming down her face. How did he know that? In that moment, she realized this man wasn't just a powerful customer, he was a machine that knew everything about his environment. "So, to replace this suit, which is 5 times your monthly wage, and to account for the inconvenience of being soaked in cheap red wine, how should I handle your error?" He spoke the word cheap with such disdain, Elara felt her face burn hotter than the summer sun. Elara closed her eyes, preparing for the worst. She imagined being fired, blacklisted, maybe even physically harmed. She thought of her grandfather's face. I can work for free, sir. For a year. To pay it back. Please, just don't call the manager." She was pleading for her job, for her lifeline. Alessandro watched her cry for another long, agonizing moment. Then, a ghost of a smirk, barely perceptible, touched the corner of his stern mouth. It was not a kind expression, but one of immense, chilling calculation. "Work for free," he repeated, tilting his head. "That is the standard punishment for incompetence, Elara. You have committed a far more serious offense than mere incompetence. You have committed an offense against my peace." He sighed, a dramatic gesture that drew all eyes back to him. The waiter who had bumped her was sweating so profusely he looked like he'd just stepped out of a sauna, ready to faint. "I had a very important meeting tonight," Alessandro continued, his voice dropping slightly. "A deal worth millions. Your wine incident has ruined the mood, broken the momentum, and thus, damaged the integrity of the arrangement." Elara thought her heart might actually stop. Millions. Her €1,000 mistake had just cost him millions? She was done for. Her whole life was about to collapse. But then, the final, terrifying twist. Alessandro leaned forward, resting his elbows on the linen-covered table, his silver-grey eyes boring into hers. "I need a replacement for that lost business momentum, Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice now almost a purr. "I do not need a waitress. I need a personal assistant who can speak flawless English, is sharp with numbers, and is desperate enough to do whatever she is told, without question. Someone who has nothing to lose." He snapped his fingers once. One of the granite men immediately placed a small, silver-rimmed document on the table in front of Elara. "Your life-altering punishment is this: you no longer work here. You are now working for me," he stated, the words final and absolute. "Your debt to me, for the suit, the wine, and the damaged business, is €2 million. We will call it an advance on the contract. Your payment will be your complete and total service, around the clock, until I decide the debt is settled, or until you fail me. You will fly with us tonight. You will sign this now, Elara, or I will ensure you never work in this country, or any other, again. And I will ensure your grandfather's medicine is the least of your concerns." Elara stared at the contract. €2 million. It was an impossible number, a mountain of debt that could never be repaid. But the alternative, her grandfather, the blacklist, the unknown horrors, was far worse. She didn't know how to read the fine print, her vision was too blurred by tears and fear. She only knew she had no choice. She took the pen offered by the associate, a heavy, cold gold pen, and signed her name, her hand shaking so badly that the ink bled on the expensive paper. With one clumsy accident, Elara Jenkins, the timid waitress, had gone from pouring wine to serving a ruthless don, her freedom suddenly locked away by an impossible price, her life changed forever. The silence of the restaurant felt less like quiet and more like a heavy, velvet shroud dropping over her new destiny. She had spilled wine, and in return, she had been sold. And that's where we pause for a moment, friends. This is just the beginning of Ilara's incredible journey. Before we dive into Chapter 2, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what city you're tuning in from. Your support helps us share these powerful stories with the whole world. Now, let's get back to Ilara. The heavy gold pen felt cold and foreign in Ilara's shaking hand, a strange, terrible weight that had just signed away her entire life. She was still sitting in the lavish, silent corner of the Italian restaurant, the deep red wine stain on the Don's grey suit mocking her. Her mahogany skin felt clammy with sweat, and she wished her thick box braids could somehow hide her burning face. The expensive document sitting in front of her wasn't a contract, it was a cage. Alessandro Vitriani watched her with those chilling, silver-grey eyes, showing no impatience, only icy certainty. He finally rose from the table, a tall shadow of power. "Pack her things," he said simply to the granite-like men surrounding him. The words weren't a request, they were an immediate, unchangeable command. One of the associates, a big man named Giorgio with a perpetually hard face, nodded. "The flight is ready, Don. Headed to New York." Ilara finally found her voice, a desperate whisper. "New York? But, my things are at the apartment. And my grandfather's medication schedule." Alessandro stopped, turning slowly. He looked down at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her feel small enough to crush. "You misunderstand the nature of this arrangement, Ilara," he said, the familiarity of her first name feeling like a slap. "You do not have a schedule anymore. You have my schedule. Your things are already being collected and will be delivered to our location. As for your grandfather," he paused, letting the fear build, "his medical needs will be taken care of. Better than you ever could, in fact. That is part of the advance I have paid for your service." He didn't make it sound like a kindness, he made it sound like another nail in her coffin. He was taking care of her loved one, not out of generosity, but to ensure her complete obedience. Her grandfather was now the rope tied around her neck. She was rushed out of the restaurant, past the stunned staff and wide-eyed customers who stared as if she were a ghost. Mr. Silas Henderson, her frail old mentor, was nowhere to be seen. They had probably dismissed him immediately. The journey to the airport was a blur of black, tinted cars and hurried steps. Soon, she found herself on a private jet, a place of luxury so extreme it felt ridiculous. The seats were soft cream leather, and the cabin was quiet and spacious. She sat miserably, squeezed between Giorgio, who looked like he could snap a steel rod, and another associate named Enzo, who hadn't spoken a single word but radiated menace. Alessandro sat across the cabin, bathed in the soft reading light, looking completely unfazed, as if this were just another Tuesday. He opened a laptop, and the cold light reflecting off his olive skin made him look even more ruthless. After the plane smoothly lifted off, heading high over the dark, sparkling coast of Europe, Alessandro finally closed his laptop and turned his full attention to Ilara. "We need to be clear about the terms of your punishment, Ilara," he began, his voice calm and deliberate, like a predator studying its prey. "For the next 30 days, or until I deem your debt of €2 million settled, you belong to me. You are my personal assistant. You are not a worker, you are a solution to a problem you created." Ilara gripped her hands together, her knuckles white. "What exactly do I have to do, sir?" "The technical details," he explained, leaning forward just enough to make her heart race, "are simple. You are responsible for ensuring that my life is always smooth. You must anticipate my needs before I even realize them. I do not want to hear that a flight is delayed, that a meeting is double booked, or that a document is missing. If I am delayed, you should have already found the fastest alternative route. If I need coffee, it should be in my hand before I ask. No complex grammar, no big words, just simple perfection." He paused, letting the sheer pressure of his expectations sink in. "We are not talking about simple administrative duties, Ilara. This involves understanding the intricate dance of international logistics, high-level business deals, and, yes, the management of certain sensitivities." He used the simple, familiar word sensitivities, but Ilara knew exactly what he meant. This was the dark world the police didn't touch, the world where mistakes were permanent. Then came the rules, delivered like heavy stones dropping into a deep well. Rule number 1, total obedience. When I speak, you move. When I give an instruction, you execute it instantly, without hesitation or question. The moment you decide to think for yourself, the punishment will be severe. Do you understand? Yes, sir, she murmured, her voice barely audible. Speak up, Ilara. We are in a private space. I need to hear assurance. Yes, sir, she repeated, louder this time. Rule number 2, no mistakes. I do not tolerate errors. The wine spill cost me only a suit. The next mistake, in the line of duty, could cost me far more. If you make a mistake that damages my business or reputation, the debt increases, and I will transfer the medical care of your grandfather to a very different, far less comfortable kind of facility. That is the leverage you gave me when you signed that paper. Ilara's breath hitched. That threat was deadly serious. It went straight for her greatest fear. She looked at her reflection in the dark window of the plane, a reflection of a frightened, cornered woman with deep brown eyes full of panic. Rule number 3, no talking back. You will communicate information clearly and concisely. You will not offer opinions. You will not argue. You will not plead for exceptions. Your job is to facilitate, not to complicate. Rule number 4, absolute silence about me. You do not speak my name, or describe what you see, or discuss the work we do, to anyone. Not to the flight attendants, not to the cleaners, and certainly not to your family. If anything leaks, I will assume it came from you. The consequences for that breach of trust will be instant and catastrophic. Not just for you, but for the one you care about. He leaned back again, finally releasing her from the direct intensity of his gaze, but the feeling of being trapped didn't leave. He was not just strict, he was establishing a boundary where her past life ended, and this terrifying servitude began. For the next 30 days, you will live by my clock, eat what I tell you to eat, and go where I tell you to go. We are heading straight to my New York penthouse, where we will begin immediately. You will be provided with clothes, a work phone, and everything else you need. You will leave the faded olive green dress behind, Ilara. That woman is gone now. You are simply my assistant. The cold, matter-of-fact way he talked about erasing her identity, about replacing her beloved, familiar dress, made her humiliation complete. She felt a wave of crushing shame wash over her. She was a woman who had worked hard for everything, and now she was reduced to a slave driven by fear for her family. She looked out the window at the vast, dark expanse of the Atlantic Ocean below, feeling completely adrift. This wasn't just a job, it was a prison disguised as luxury. She had spilled wine, and her punishment was to enter a world of ruthless wealth and danger, serving the man who held her only hope, her only fear, right in the palm of his hand. Ilara straightened her back, trying to force some strength into her posture. She couldn't be timid anymore. She had to be clever. For her grandfather, she would play the role of the perfect assistant, navigating this dangerous, new world until she could somehow find a way out, or at least survive the next 30 days. The New York penthouse was vast and silent, a cage of glass and polished marble high above the city. Ilara stood by the massive window, looking down at the millions of tiny, bright lights below. The view should have been breathtaking, but all she felt was the cold glass against her forehead. The air conditioning was set low, and she shivered, though she knew the chill wasn't coming from the temperature. It was coming from the atmosphere of pure, relentless suspicion. She was wearing her new uniform, a crisp, charcoal gray suit that was perfectly tailored but felt stiff and restrictive. It was the complete opposite of her comfortable, faded olive green dress. Her deep mahogany skin looked richer against the severe fabric, but the clothes felt like a costume for a role she didn't want to play. Alessandro had disappeared into a private office immediately upon arrival. He left Ilara surrounded by his men, and every single one of them looked at her like she was a dangerous virus. There was Giorgio, the granite-faced man from the jet, who stood by the door and didn't blink. There was Enzo, the silent menace, who now watched her from a dark leather couch. They weren't just security, they were his inner circle, his loyal guard dogs, and they saw her as a silly waitress who had stumbled into their dangerous den. Ilara knew they were waiting for her to fail. They were waiting for her to break one of the Don's strict rules so they could send her packing, or worse. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Then, the true challenge entered the room. His name was Rico. He was Alessandro's consigliere, the man who advised him and handled his most delicate problems. Rico was in his mid-40s, lean and sharp, with dark, watchful brown eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He wore an expensive Italian suit that fit him like a second skin, and his slicked-back dark hair gave him an air of smooth, cruel intelligence. He was the kind of man who calculated the exact cost of every word before he spoke it. Rico walked past Ilara without acknowledging her, then turned slowly, a look of profound distaste twisting his features. "So," Rico said, his voice low and carrying a hint of a smooth Italian accent. "The Don trades a €2 million asset for a clumsy waitress." He made the word waitress sound like dote. A woman who can't even hold a bottle of wine. The logic escapes me. Ilara kept her posture stiff, remembering rule number 3, no talking back. She didn't argue, didn't plead, and didn't apologize again. She just stood there, meeting his watchful gaze with the forced composure of her own deep brown eyes. Rico wasn't satisfied with her silence. He wanted to break her. He walked to a high-tech console on the wall, tapped a few keys, and a dizzying array of spreadsheets and graphs filled the large screen. "Let's see if your brain is faster than your hands, Ilara," he said, handing her a sleek, specialized tablet. "The Don needs a precise operation executed immediately. We have 5 large amounts of money spread out across different accounts in London, Toronto, and Geneva." Ilara's mind immediately screamed, technical jargon. The words he was using, asset dispersion, liquidity restructuring, sounded complicated and scary. But she focused on the simple, raw meaning. "He wants me to combine funds from 3 different places," she stated simply, keeping her voice even. Rico's brow furrowed slightly. He didn't expect her to translate his business language so quickly. "Precisely. But here is the problem, the incompetence filter," he sneered. "Each transfer must happen at the exact same moment, midnight, New York time. However, due to the different time zones and complex local banking laws, the transfer instructions have to be sent at varying times, some in the dead of night, some during their rush hour. Calculate the exact sequence of instructions, down to the second, for all 5 banks so they all hit the central account at 12 a.m. estimated." It was a nightmare of time zone math, currency exchange calculations, and dealing with the confusing rules of different countries. It was designed to make her fail immediately. Ilara took a deep breath. This was her element, not serving plates, but solving puzzles. Back home, she used to manage the complex invoices for a small construction company, coordinating deliveries across state lines, handling permits, and dealing with different city requirements. This was just a bigger, more dangerous version of that. She didn't panic. She started working backward. First, she scribbled the basic time differences on the notepad function of the tablet. London was 5 hours ahead. Geneva was 6 hours ahead. Toronto was the same. New York midnight, 12 a.m., is 5 a.m. in London. New York midnight, 12 a.m., is 6 a.m. in Geneva. She then quickly scanned the data Rico provided, ignoring the banking jargon and looking only for the simple facts. Bank X requires 3 hours processing time. Bank Y requires 4 hours. She realized the trick. The easiest banks to move money through had to have their instructions sent last, while the slower banks, like the ones in Geneva, needed the instructions sent earlier to ensure they didn't miss the midnight deadline. It wasn't about sending them all at the same moment, it was about making sure they landed at the same moment. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the penthouse was the soft tap-tap-tap of Ilara's fingers on the screen. She was completely absorbed, her brow furrowed in concentration. The fear was still there, but it was pushed back by the familiar satisfaction of problem-solving. Rico watched her, leaning against the door frame, his dark brown eyes narrowed, expecting to see her break down. Giorgio and Enzo maintained their stone-faced vigil. Finally, Ilara finished. She checked her work 3 times, confirming the timing. "I have the sequence," she announced, holding up the tablet. Rico took it, his expression skeptical. He glanced down, and his eyes widened just slightly, a tiny, flickering admission of surprise. She had not only solved it, but she had used the optimal sequence, minimizing the time the money spent in transit and exposed. "This is correct," he admitted grudgingly, but the praise was bitter. He looked instantly angrier than if she had failed. Her success meant she was staying. "It seems the Don was correct. You have a knack for following simple instructions." Ilara knew that his failure to crush her had only elevated her danger. She had passed the test, but now she was a recognized threat to his own position. As Rico stalked off to deliver the sequence to Alessandro, Ilara realized the hidden, deadly nature of her new job. It wasn't the hours, or the strict rules, or even the difficult paperwork that was the real danger. It was the people. Every minute she spent near Alessandro was a minute she was surrounded by people like Rico, people who saw her as an obstacle, an outsider, a weak link to be ruthlessly exposed and removed. She wasn't just fighting her €2 million debt, she was fighting a daily battle for survival against men who would happily sabotage her and throw her to the wolves to secure their own place in the Don's tight circle. Ilara knew that the price of silence was her servitude, but the price of proximity was constant, potentially fatal danger. She had to be more than clever, she had to be invisible and untouchable at the same time. The New York penthouse was vast, but it felt smaller every day to Ilara. She moved through the hallways like a ghost, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floors, her new charcoal gray suit feeling heavier than ever. She had survived the first few days by being flawless, navigating complex business logistics and keeping Alessandro's intricate world running smoothly. She was exhausted, but the fear of letting her grandfather down kept her going. It was during a quiet moment, while organizing Alessandro's mail, a mountain of heavy documents, international contracts, and envelopes sealed with official stamps, that the strange things started. She was in the Don's massive, intimidating office. The room was all dark wood and deep shadows, the kind of place where immense power was wielded in absolute silence. Ilara had just finished sorting the day's papers when she spotted it. Tucked innocently beneath a stack of glossy European magazines was a simple, folded piece of thick, cream-colored paper. It was not addressed to Alessandro, and it certainly wasn't addressed to her. Cautiously, Ilara unfolded the paper. Written on it, in neat, hurried handwriting, were 3 short, chilling words: "Leave him now." Ilara's heart gave a violent lurch in her chest. Her deep brown eyes scanned the note, then darted nervously toward the door, checking for Giorgio or Enzo. Who would put this here? She was locked in this apartment, guarded by ruthless men, and watched constantly. How had an outsider's warning gotten onto the Don's desk? Her first instinct was to throw it away, to forget she ever saw it, following rule number 4, absolute silence about me, but the threat against her family, the image of her frail grandfather, held her back. This note confirmed what she already knew. She wasn't just dealing with a cold-hearted boss, she was dealing with deadly danger. She crumpled the paper in her hand, the expensive suit feeling suddenly too hot. She didn't know if this was a test by Alessandro's inner circle, maybe Rico trying to catch her discussing private matters, or a genuine warning from someone who knew what horrors lay ahead. The next warning came 24 hours later. Ilara had been in a small, windowless data room, working on a complex financial report that used simple language to talk about moving huge sums of money. She had stepped out for a quick glass of water, locking the room behind her. When she came back, the room was exactly as she had left it. But lying right on top of her own personal tablet, the one Alessandro had given her, was a tiny, folded slip of paper. This time, the message was more cryptic, and written in pencil. "The silence is the price, but the truth is the killer." Ilara quickly snatched it up, her mind racing. The message used the word silence, the very thing Alessandro had demanded of her. This wasn't a random threat, this was someone who knew her situation, knew the rules she was forced to follow. She ran her hand over her mid-back box braids, trying to calm herself. The logical part of her brain, the one that used to solve complex time zone equations, was screaming for answers. Who was targeting her? Option 1, Alessandro's people. It could be Rico, still trying to prove she was a liability. He might be trying to scare her into making a mistake, or talking to someone, so he could expose her disobedience. Option 2, an outside enemy. Alessandro had rivals all over the world. Maybe one of them was using her, the new, disposable assistant, to get to him, hoping she would become a liability or a weakness. Option 3, someone from the past. A former assistant? A former enemy who had been forced into the same terrifying debt? Someone who had gotten out, or hadn't been so lucky. The more she thought about it, the more the suspense tightened around her like a physical chain. The note about the truth being the killer made the second option the most terrifying. She wasn't just working for a very wealthy, very strict man, she was working for a target, and she was now standing right next to the bullseye. That evening, Ilara was instructed to prepare for an urgent trip to Toronto, Canada. Alessandro was dealing with an issue related to a large real estate development there. As she searched his coat pockets to ensure he had the correct set of keys and identification, she found something else. In the deepest inner pocket of his coat, a pocket she knew he rarely used, was a tiny, gold-plated key. It was an ordinary key, but tucked beneath it was the third note. This one wasn't handwritten. It was a single, printed line, clean and cold. The bridge is the break. Don't cross it. This message made no sense. What bridge? The reference to a bridge felt like a warning about their upcoming journey. Their jet was heading to Toronto. Was there a specific deal, or person, or location there that this mysterious person was warning her about? Ilara quickly put the note back exactly where she found it. She realized she couldn't simply destroy the warnings. If they were a setup by Rico, destroying them would prove she was hiding something. If they were a real warning, destroying them might cost her her life. She looked around the quiet, opulent penthouse, the massive space suddenly feeling like a small, pressure cooker environment. She had thought the danger of being close to the Don was dealing with difficult logistics and his icy temper. She realized now that the hidden dangers were far worse. This was a world of whispers, hidden enemies, and cryptic warnings, and she was the helpless pawn caught in the middle. Ilara knew she couldn't leave, not with her grandfather's life depending on her. She had to stay, she had to obey, and she had to figure out who was leaving the warnings, and what terrible truth they were trying to tell her, before it was too late. She felt a cold dread settle deep in her gut, knowing that the punishment contract wasn't the only thing that bound her. Fear was a leash, and the anonymous stalker was tightening it slowly. Ilara's life had become one long, exhausting lesson in paying attention. She didn't just listen to words anymore, she listened to the silences, the shifts in tone, and the way the shadows fell across the faces of Alessandro's inner circle. She had to, because the air around the Don was thick with hostility, and the anonymous notes had made it clear that her survival was hanging by a thread. Every morning, she put on the stiff, charcoal gray suit, and every morning, she felt less like Ilara Jenkins and more like a human shield. She had arrived in Toronto, Canada, under a blanket of heavy security. The setting was a sleek, modern, anonymous high-rise office building, far colder and less comforting than the old-world elegance of Florence. Alessandro was locked in back-to-back meetings concerning a massive property deal, the very bridge that the cryptic note had warned her about. The pressure on the Don was immense, and the tension was making his people crack. Ilara was responsible for coordinating all the movements and communications between Alessandro and the people waiting outside, a job that meant constantly weaving through the security detail. It was during one of these trips, carrying a stack of revised legal documents, that she accidentally stumbled into something much darker than paperwork. She was heading toward the Don's private conference room, taking a shortcut through a service hallway near the executive kitchen. The lighting here was dim, and the air smelled faintly of stale coffee. Just as she rounded a corner, she heard two distinct voices, low, urgent, and angry, coming from the staff stairwell landing. She stopped dead, pressing her back against the cool wall, the thick stack of papers held tight against her chest. She recognized the voices immediately. One was the smooth, calculating tone of Rico, the consigliere who openly despised her. The other was Enzo, the silent associate, who usually never spoke at all. "The time is now, Enzo," Rico's voice hissed, sounding tight with nervous excitement. "He is distracted by this bridge real estate mess. He thinks his control is absolute. He thinks that clumsy little Waitress is his greatest threat, when I have been here, the trusted one, for 10 years. Ilara's deep brown eyes widened in horror. Her heart started to pound so loudly she thought it might give them away. They were talking about Alessandro. Enzo's voice was a low, gravelly sound, the first time Ilara had ever heard him speak. "It is too risky, Rico. Giorgio is too loyal. The others are watching. Loyalty is cheap, Enzo. Fear is permanent," Rico shot back, his voice dropping lower. "I have the proof. The Toronto authorities are already close to exposing his weakness. I just need to tip the scale. Alessandro's control over the accounts is becoming sloppy. The moment he looks vulnerable, the others, the rivals, will pounce. And when they pounce, who will they look to for leadership? The man who was already running things." Rico paused, and Ilara could almost picture his cruel, confident smile. "I need you to ensure that the document, the one Ilara organized, gets delayed. Just long enough for the deadline to pass. That financial failure will be the sign of weakness the others need. It won't be a full coup, Enzo. It will be a graceful removal of the boss, a simple shift in power. Ilara felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her deep mahogany skin feeling cold. A simple shift in power. That meant a betrayal that would cost Alessandro everything, maybe even his life. And they were planning to use her work, the flawless logistical plan she had calculated to move the money perfectly, as the key point of failure. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She had to ensure his business succeeded to save her grandfather, but his most trusted man was planning to ensure it failed. She pressed herself further into the shadows, waiting for them to leave. When the footsteps finally faded, Ilara crept out, her mind spinning. The reality hit her with crushing force. Rico wasn't just planning a simple office backstabbing, he was coordinating a full-scale political overthrow within this dangerous organization. She had to tell someone. The Don was in a meeting, unreachable. She had to stop the sabotage. Ilara found Giorgio standing guard by the main elevator bank. He was a towering man, usually silent, with a stone-like face and eyes that only seemed to focus on threats. He was the one Rico feared, the epitome of raw, unquestioning loyalty. Ilara walked up to him, trying to keep her voice steady. Giorgio, I need to speak to the Don immediately. It's an urgent, life-and-death security matter. Giorgio didn't even turn his head fully. He glanced at her with cold disinterest. The Don is in a closed meeting, Ilara. Wait your turn. No, you don't understand, she pleaded, her voice rising slightly. She lowered it instantly, remembering the rules. It's Rico. And Enzo. They are planning to sabotage the Toronto deal. They are using the document transfer to make Alessandro look weak. It's a coup, they want to take over. She kept the language simple, avoiding terms like consiglia or liquidity restructuring, just sticking to the words sabotage and takeover. Giorgio finally turned his head, and his look of intense scrutiny was instantly humiliating. His face remained completely blank, devoid of any reaction to the deadly accusation. Rico is the Don's most trusted advisor, Giorgio said slowly, his voice rough and dismissive. He has managed this family for over a decade. And you, Ilara, are a waitress who spilled wine on the boss a week ago. You signed a punishment contract, and now you think you can walk in here and accuse a man of Rico's standing of betrayal. He laughed, a short, dry, unpleasant sound. The only person making a mistake right now, Ilara, is you. You are overstepping your boundaries. You are creating drama where there is only work. Do not speak of this again. Do not disrupt the Don's focus with fanciful stories. He turned back to the elevator, his immense, broad back silently telling her the conversation was over. Ilara stood there, heartbroken and terrified. No one believed her. To Giorgio, she was nothing but a frightened, clumsy girl seeking attention. Her position as an outsider, her debt, and her humiliating entry into this world instantly made her testimony worthless against a man as entrenched as Rico. The cold truth settled in, she was caught. She was trapped between the Don's terrifying rules and Rico's imminent betrayal. If she kept silent, Rico would succeed, Alessandro would fall, and the organization would collapse, taking her grandfather's medical care with it. If she kept pushing, Giorgio would report her for breaking rule number 3, no talking back, and Alessandro would punish her himself. Ilara knew she couldn't simply run or walk away. She was bound by a price of €2 million and a threat to her family. Her only path to survival was to secretly protect the very man who had enslaved her. She had to outsmart Rico, the seasoned traitor, without ever letting Alessandro know she was doing it. The game had just changed from administration to high-stakes survival. Ilara's mind was a frantic knot of secrets. She had the heavy knowledge of Rico's betrayal locked inside her, but telling anyone meant her ruin, and saying nothing meant the Don's ruin. She had spent the last day trying to silently counter Rico's sabotage, checking every document and every wire transfer detail, her deep brown eyes scanning the reports with desperate focus. She hadn't slept. Her fatigue was showing even through the mask of her perfect charcoal gray suit. They were still in the Toronto offices, a place Ilara now saw not as a modern building, but as a silent battlefield. The silence was shattered early that morning, not by an argument, but by a chilling, guttural roar of pure rage from Alessandro's private chambers. It was a sound Ilara hadn't heard before, a raw, emotional fury that was far more terrifying than his usual icy control. Giorgio, the loyal guard, burst out of the Don's office, his granite face distorted by shock and anger. He didn't even look at Ilara as he passed, but his words hung in the air like smoke. The lion's eye is gone. It's been stolen. Ilara had heard whispers about the lion's eye. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a physical symbol of the Vitriani family's power, passed down for 300 years. It was a simple, heavy gold medallion shaped like a roaring lion's head, studded with a single, massive amber gemstone for the eye. It was said that the moment the lion's eye left the family's direct possession, their reign would crumble. Alessandro walked out of his office, his olive skin pale with fury. His silver-grey eyes, usually so composed, were burning with a dangerous, unstable fire. He held an empty, velvet-lined box in his hand. "Seal the floor," he commanded, his voice trembling only slightly with effort. "No one leaves. If that medallion is not found in 2 hours, every person in this building will answer to me." Panic rippled through the security detail. Giorgio immediately took charge, barking orders. Ilara stood frozen, watching the chaos erupt. She knew instantly this wasn't about money, this was a personal and political attack on Alessandro's very right to lead. Then, Rico walked in, looking outwardly shocked and horrified, but his dark eyes were bright with a triumphant, malicious gleam that Ilara immediately recognized. "Don, this is a crisis," Rico said, his tone perfectly pitched for sympathy and concern. "This is a direct insult. We must assume it's one of your international rivals making a political statement." Alessandro turned away from Rico, his sharp gaze sweeping over the security team, looking for answers. That's when Giorgio pointed. "Sir, the security logs show something," Giorgio said, his voice grim. "It's impossible, but the system recorded the only entry into the secure vault hallway between the hours of 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. Alessandro walked over to the surveillance screen being set up by Enzo. Ilara, rooted to the spot, watched the digital video play. It was grainy, dark, and shaky, but clear enough to make out the shape. The video showed a figure wearing a dark suit and carrying a large, open-top tray moving quickly down the hallway toward the vault. The camera angle was perfect, catching the person's face clearly for a split second as they turned. And that face was Ilara's. The woman on the screen had deep mahogany skin, a stiff suit, and the distinctive coil of box braids. She looked straight at the camera before entering the vault room, and then emerged moments later, walking away with the large tray that was now clearly holding the heavy gold lion's eye. The entire office fell silent again, but this silence was far more terrifying than the one after the wine incident. This silence was focused entirely on Ilara. "Ilara," Alessandro said, his voice dangerously low, turning to face her fully. He didn't scream or accuse. He simply stated a fact, his silver-grey eyes pinning her in place. "The lion's eye was in your care. You were the last person near the vault's schedule log. And now, the footage shows you taking it." Ilara's blood ran cold. She finally understood the scope of Rico's betrayal. The betrayal wasn't just about the real estate deal, it was about destroying her, his rival, and crippling Alessandro's reputation in one move. "Sir, I swear, that is not me." Ilara rushed forward, her voice desperate. "I was asleep. I never went near the vault. That footage is fake. It's been edited, I know it has." "Easy, Ilara," Rico interjected smoothly, stepping closer to Alessandro. "The pressure is getting to her. Denial is standard. The evidence is on the screen, Don. She is a low-level worker with a massive €2 million debt. She was desperate. She saw an easy opportunity. A desperate waitress risks her life to steal a mythical family heirloom she couldn't fence if she tried." Alessandro countered, but not to Ilara. He was speaking to Rico, his silver eyes narrowed in thought. "A simple statement of debt and desperation," Rico insisted, his confidence wavering slightly. Ilara seized the small window of doubt. "Think about it, Don. I just spent days coordinating millions of euros perfectly to save your real estate deal. Why would I risk everything, my grandfather's life, for one piece of gold I can't even sell? Why would I steal something that guarantees my instant death?" She didn't mention Rico. She didn't have to. She used pure logic, challenging the simplicity of the frame. Alessandro walked toward the screen and put his hand on the bezel, staring at the grainy image of the framed Ilara. "It is too neat," he muttered, mostly to himself. "The timing is too perfect. The camera angle is too accommodating." He turned back to his men. His silver-gray eyes swept past Rico, past Giorgio, and landed on Enzo. He looked at every face, his expression now less furious and more analytical. The Don was famous for his paranoid suspicion, and the overly clean framing of Ilara had triggered his deepest instincts. A simple, clumsy waitress stealing his most symbolic asset was too easy to believe. It felt like a distraction, a setup. "Ilara is under arrest," Alessandro declared, the command cutting through the tension. Ilara gasped, feeling the handcuffs click around her wrists. She wanted to scream, but she knew that would seal her fate. "Wait," Alessandro continued, stopping Giorgio, who was moving to drag her away. "She will be detained, but not in a facility. Not yet. Giorgio, take her to the safe house. Rico, I want a deep audit of every single asset transfer you have handled in the last 48 hours. I need to know if this crisis is meant to distract me from something far more serious. Enzo, stay here and re-examine the system logs for tampering. I want to see the original, unedited footage." Ilara, guarded by a now very suspicious Giorgio, was led away, her hands bound. The charcoal suit felt like a uniform of shame. She knew she was moments away from ruin, but she had achieved one small victory. She had planted the seed of doubt in the Don's mind. Alessandro was furious, yes, but more importantly, he was suspicious, and his suspicion was now aimed inward, toward his own empire, exactly where Rico's betrayal was hiding. The game of survival was getting darker and more complicated, and Ilara's fate now depended entirely on Alessandro's slow-burning realization that the enemy wasn't the waitress he bought, but the advisor he trusted. Ilara was not in a jail cell, but she wasn't free either. She was held in a secure, lavish apartment on a different floor of the Toronto high-rise, a gilded cage. Giorgio, the massive, loyal guard, watched her every movement, but the handcuffs were gone. She still wore the charcoal gray suit, which felt like a uniform of accusation. The lion's eye theft had shaken the whole operation, and Ilara knew that the slightest hesitation in Alessandro's doubt would mean the end of her life, and by extension, the end of her grandfather's safety. She was waiting for the final verdict when Giorgio suddenly appeared, holding a small, velvet box. His stone face looked even more confused than usual. "The Don requires you to change," Giorgio stated, his voice flat. "And put this on." The box contained a dress, a beautiful, flowing crimson gown that seemed designed to steal every bit of light in the room, and resting on the satin cushion was a ring. It wasn't just a ring, it was a diamond the size of a pigeon's egg, set in heavy, blinding platinum. It screamed of impossible wealth. Ilara stared at the guard, her deep brown eyes wide with disbelief. "Change into a formal gown? Giorgio, I've been framed for stealing a 300-year-old artifact. We should be planning my escape, not attending a party." Giorgio shrugged his massive shoulders. "The Don's orders are not for discussion. They are for compliance. You have 5 minutes. The council is waiting." The council. That meant the heads of Alessandro's entire international operation, the most dangerous, powerful men and women who governed his empire. They were there to discuss the theft and decide who was to blame, and the prime suspect was Ilara. Heart pounding, she changed quickly. The crimson gown felt wrong against her skin, too bright, too public, but it fit perfectly. She quickly arranged the thick coils of her box braids, feeling exposed and vulnerable. She slipped the gigantic, dazzling ring onto her finger. It felt like a stone, heavy and cold. When she walked into the large, paneled conference room, the air was electric. All eyes snapped to her. The room was filled with serious, powerful people, all dressed in formal, dark attire. And standing at the head of the table, tall and commanding in his perfectly tailored suit, was Alessandro. He looked across the room at Ilara, and for the first time, his silver-gray eyes didn't hold ice or anger. They held a flash of warning, a signal to perform. Ilara walked to him, forcing a timid, fragile smile that felt like sandpaper on her lips. She stopped beside him, feeling the heat and immense pressure of his presence. Alessandro put his arm around her waist. The simple, possessive gesture sent a jolt of shock through her. It was the first time he had touched her, and the sudden physical closeness to the source of all her fear and control was overwhelming. Rico was there, standing a little distance away, and his dark eyes were wide with pure, unfiltered shock and rage. His face was a mask of furious disbelief, which gave Elara a grim satisfaction. Rico's plan to isolate and execute her had just been derailed spectacularly. Alessandro raised his hand, silencing the room. His voice was smooth, carrying the weight of unquestionable authority, yet tinged with a warmth Elara knew was completely fake. "Gentlemen," he announced, his gaze sweeping over the council. "And ladies, we have a moment of good news amidst the chaos of this lion's eye incident. I have brought Miss Elara Jenkins here today not as my assistant, but as my future wife. She has accepted my proposal, and we will be married immediately following the completion of this business in Toronto." A collective gasp went through the council. It was a perfectly timed, calculated political bomb. Elara felt the entire room reel. The council members, who had minutes ago been plotting her execution as a thief, now had to process that she was the future Don's wife. The shift in power, the utter, undeniable shock, was almost comical, if it hadn't been so terrifying. Alessandro squeezed her waist gently, a silent command for her to play along. He tilted his head down and gave her a public, formal kiss on the cheek. Elara's body went rigid. The sheer audacity of his move, using her humiliation and fear as a shield, was breathtaking. "The theft of the lion's eye," Alessandro continued, his voice hardening, "was an internal attack meant to destabilize the family and attack my personal integrity. As Elara is now my fiancée, and part of my bloodline, any accusations leveled against her are attacks against me and my judgment. I believe the thief is still among us, and their attempt to frame my future wife is an act of treason. Find the real traitor, or face the consequences." Elara finally understood the complexity of his move, the reason behind the fake engagement. He hadn't done it out of affection, he had done it out of brilliant, self-serving strategy. The council couldn't harm his fiancée without directly challenging his authority. The engagement turned her from a disposable waitress into an untouchable extension of his power. It was protection born of political necessity. That night, back in the penthouse, Alessandro had her sign yet another document, a detailed, ironclad non-disclosure agreement stating that the engagement was a political performance, a lie to protect the organization, and that she was never to disclose the truth. "The rules are the same, Elara," Alessandro told her, peeling off his jacket and tossing it onto a chair. He looked tired but intensely focused. "Total obedience. Total silence. Now, however, the stakes are higher. You will never, not even in private, contradict this engagement. You will act the part of the devoted, happy partner. You will smile at people who want to kill you. And you will wear that diamond until I tell you otherwise." As he spoke, he walked toward her, and Elara instinctively held her breath. He stopped inches away, looking down at her, his silver-gray eyes studying her face. "You look scared, Elara," he noted, his voice flat. "But you are also safe. For now. You are more protected than you have ever been." Elara could smell his expensive cologne, the faint scent of leather and cedar. He was close enough that she could feel the faint heat radiating from his body. She looked up at his cold, olive-skinned face, and the terrible truth hit her, she was feeling something forbidden. It wasn't love. It was the strange, disorienting rush of feeling seen by this terrifying, ruthless man. He had seen her intelligence, her competence under pressure, and he had chosen to protect her, not gently, but ruthlessly, with a massive show of power. She was attracted to his strength, the absolute control that had saved her life. It was a terrifying, deeply humiliating feeling to be drawn to the very man who held her captive. She was pretending to be his wife, forced into a dazzling crimson dress and a $2 million lie, but beneath the performance, a genuine, complicated, and utterly forbidden current was starting to flow between the captive and the captor. Elara knew that escaping his debt would be hard, but escaping the terrible, dangerous attraction building between them might be impossible. The pretense of the engagement was the most exhausting performance Elara had ever endured. She wore the massive diamond ring and the luxurious clothes, but every smile she gave the council members felt like a lie that bruised her soul. The fake title of fiancée protected her from execution, but it threw her into terrifying proximity with Alessandro, the one person who held the power to destroy her. The setting was now back in the New York penthouse, the glass and marble feeling less like a cage and more like a theatrical stage. The emotional tension between them was a constant, humming wire that neither of them dared to touch. Ilara was still waiting for Alessandro to discover the truth about Rico's betrayal, the sabotage she had worked so hard to secretly prevent, but the Don was consumed by the public fallout of the Lion's Eye theft. One evening, after a brutal, silent dinner where they sat miles apart at the huge dining table, Alessandro retreated to his study. Ilara followed, as was required of his dedicated assistant fiancé, carrying a tray of untouched coffee and a glass of expensive whiskey. She found him not working, but standing by the window, staring out at the city lights, the exhaustion of the week finally etched onto his usually flawless olive skin. He had shed his suit jacket, and his white shirt was slightly undone at the neck, revealing a simple silver chain, a small, human detail she had never noticed before. "The council is satisfied, for now," he said, not turning around. His voice was flat. "They believe the thief, the real thief, is among the old guard. Your little performance was effective, Ilara." Ilara placed the tray quietly on his desk. "It was your strategy, Don. I just followed instructions." "A lot of people follow instructions," he countered, turning slightly to look at her. His silver-gray eyes were tired, the icy shield around them momentarily lowered. "They don't execute them perfectly when they believe they are facing certain death." Ilara met his gaze with her deep brown eyes, refusing to look away. "I am motivated by fear, sir. The fear of failure, and the fear of what happens to my grandfather if I fail." "Fear is a good motivator," Alessandro admitted, taking the whiskey glass. He stared into the amber liquid, then looked back out at the city. "But it's a poor foundation. That's what my father taught me." He paused, and the silence stretched, heavy with unspoken history. "My father," Alessandro began, his voice softer than Ilara had ever heard it, "was not like me. He was loud. He was passionate. He believed in loyalty, not fear. He built this from nothing, believing that the work should be done for love of the family, not for control." This was the first time he had spoken about his past. Ilara stood utterly still, knowing this was dangerous ground. "What happened?" she asked quietly, breaking rule number 3 about not challenging or asking questions, but she couldn't stop herself. Her curiosity about the man behind the ruthless mask was too strong. Alessandro took a long drink of the whiskey. "My father was betrayed. Not by a rival, but by his own consigliere, the man who was supposed to be his brother, his eyes, and his ears. He was too trusting. He didn't see the whispers. When the time came, he was alone on a bridge, and he was executed by the man he considered family." The word bridge hit Ilara hard. "The bridge is the break. Don't cross it." The anonymous note from Chapter 4 suddenly made chilling sense. The betrayal was tied to a physical location, a moment of weakness, and the betrayal was being repeated. "And you never forgot that moment," Ilara stated, not as a question, but as a painful observation. "You built this entire empire on fear and control to make sure you never end up like him, trusting someone who secretly hates you." Alessandro turned around completely, his tired eyes now sharp with surprise. No one, absolutely no one, in his life had ever summarized his entire philosophy so plainly or challenged his emotional foundation. His face, usually cold olive, held a flicker of genuine vulnerability. "You speak too freely, Ilara," he warned, but his voice lacked its usual menace. "You asked me to be the perfect assistant," she countered, taking a small, defiant step forward. "The perfect assistant needs to understand the true threats. The man who is betraying you, the man who set up the Lion's Eye heist, is not some rival in Rome, Don. He is the man who looks exactly like the man who betrayed your father. The man you trusted most." She held his gaze, her heart hammering wildly. She was laying out the deepest secret, knowing this gamble could cost her everything. "The fear you have created has blinded you to the danger right under your nose. I was framed because Rico knows I'm the only one who sees it. And you are too busy looking at the external enemies to realize the Lion's Eye was an inside job, a warning that the story is repeating itself." Alessandro didn't respond with rage. He simply stared at her, absorbing the impossible truth she had just spoken. The icy control around him began to visibly crack. He was seeing her not as a debt-ridden employee, but as an incredibly smart, brave woman who risked her life to tell him what he desperately needed to hear. "You knew this," he finally whispered, his voice hoarse. And you said nothing to Giorgio. You spoke only to me. I knew Giorgio would never believe the clumsy waitress over the esteemed consigliere, Ilara admitted. I had to wait until you were vulnerable enough to listen. The tension in the room was now palpable, no longer just the fear of a subordinate, but the dangerous electricity between two intensely intelligent people caught in a forbidden space. Ilara's breathing grew shallow as she looked at him. She was drawn not just to his power, but to the raw, wounded man behind the silver-grey eyes, the man who was just as trapped by his past as she was by her debt. Alessandro put his glass down on the desk with a soft thud. He walked towards her, and this time, the movement was not a threat, but a gravitational pull. He stopped just inches away, his shadow covering her. He reached out and gently brushed a stray coil of her box braids away from her cheek, his touch feather-light and unexpected. You challenge my control, Ilara, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. And yet, you are the only person I feel I can trust. He didn't need to confess his growing feelings, and she didn't need to confess hers. The chemistry was undeniable. It was a dangerous, forbidden thing, born of extreme pressure, shared secrets, and the magnetic attraction between the man who controlled everything and the woman who was finally seeing the man behind the control. In that moment, the 2 million euros of debt felt less important than the overwhelming, impossible feeling of connection that neither could admit, but both desperately felt. The tension between Ilara and Alessandro had become a silent language they spoke only when no one else was around. The vulnerability he had shown, and the impossible secret they now shared about Rico's betrayal, had bound them closer than the fake engagement ever could. Ilara was still his debt-ridden assistant, wearing the heavy diamond, but now she was also his unwilling confidant, the only person who dared to tell him the dangerous truth. However, in this world of secrets and control, trust was a fragile thing, and danger often arrived wearing a stunning disguise. The new danger arrived during a large, public charity gala in New York, a place where Alessandro maintained his image as a respectable, powerful businessman. Ilara was forced to cling to his arm, playing the role of the devoted, happy fiancé in the crimson gown. The diamond ring on her finger felt less like a shield and more like a massive, flashing target. It was during a quiet moment by the massive ballroom doors that Ilara saw her. Her name was Valentina. She was a woman in her late 30s, with skin the color of warm honey and long, impossibly smooth black hair that cascaded down her back like silk. She wore a dress the color of polished emeralds, and everything about her, from her perfectly arched eyebrows to the fierce, predatory gleam in her dark eyes, screamed of confidence and danger. She moved with the silent, coiled grace of a panther, and when she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. Valentina walked straight toward Alessandro, ignoring everyone else in the room. When she reached him, she didn't just touch his arm, she slid her perfectly manicured hand up his sleeve and placed it possessively on his shoulder. Alessandro, she purred, her voice a low, melodic sound that carried an unmistakable claim. I see you've found yourself a charming new accessory. A little younger than your usual taste, wouldn't you say? Alessandro's olive skin tightened instantly, and his silver-grey eyes, which had softened slightly for Ilara lately, snapped back to the familiar ice. Valentina. This is Ilara. My fiancé. Valentina barely glanced at Ilara. Her dark eyes swept over Ilara's deep mahogany skin and her tightly coiled box braids with a look of pure, cutting disdain. The dismissal was so complete, Ilara felt a flush of humiliation rise on her neck. Fiancé, Valentina repeated, the word dripping with venomous amusement. Oh, Alessandro. You always did have a taste for the exotic when you were bored. But you know that little games get tiresome quickly, don't you, my love? She addressed Alessandro, but her eyes were fixed on Ilara, measuring her, assessing the threat she posed. Ilara knew immediately who Valentina was. This wasn't just a scorned ex-lover. This was a woman of equal status and dangerous connection to Alessandro's dark world. She was polished, powerful, and utterly convinced that Ilara was a temporary distraction, a simple girl who had taken the place that rightfully belonged to her. I'm afraid I'm not an accessory, Valentina, Ilara interjected quietly, forcing herself to keep her voice calm and level. I'm his partner. In business, and in everything else. And your timing is quite inconvenient. Valentina finally turned her full attention to Ilara, and the malice in her dark eyes was no longer hidden. You have spirit, little one. I will give you that. But in this world, Spirit is easily broken. I was his partner, his true confidant, for 5 years. He built the majority of his European network while I was by his side. You are just a clumsy waitress he bought to clean up a wine spill. That diamond on your finger is nothing but a collar. The comment about the wine spill was a low blow, showing she knew exactly how Ilara had entered this world, a secret that should have been guarded more closely. Alessandro gently, but firmly, removed Valentina's hand from his shoulder. That is enough, Valentina. Ilara is protected by the family name now. Any disrespect to her is disrespect to me. Protection is temporary, Alessandro, Valentina shot back, her voice dropping to a low, seductive whisper intended only for him. Especially when the person being protected is a weak link. Be careful. The council respects legacy, not charity. If your choice of partner proves to be a liability, you will have more than just a stolen heirloom to worry about. With one last, cold, lingering look at Ilara, a look that promised future pain, Valentina swept away, melting back into the crowd. Ilara felt the immense pressure of the encounter lift, but the fear was replaced by a cold dread. Rico's threat had been political and business-oriented, aimed at destabilizing Alessandro's empire. Valentina's threat was different. It was primal, jealous, and intensely personal. Valentina didn't want Alessandro to fall, she wanted him back, and she viewed Ilara as a flea to be crushed. That night, back at the penthouse, Ilara found a small, unmarked envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single, black-and-white photograph. It was a picture of her frail grandfather, Mr. Silas Henderson, sitting peacefully in his wheelchair on a sunny park bench back in the United States. His pale, weathered face was smiling, and he looked perfectly safe. But the picture wasn't the threat. Stamped subtly in the bottom right corner was a tiny, stylized V, Valentina's signature. Ilara's breath hitched in her throat. Her hands, which usually never shook when dealing with millions of dollars in financial transfers, now trembled violently as she looked at the photograph. She didn't fear for herself, she feared for the one person she truly loved. Valentina hadn't just threatened her, she had crossed the line. She had reached across continents and shown Ilara that her grandfather was reachable, vulnerable, and completely exposed. The danger was no longer about a debt or a political coup, it was about survival, and Valentina was playing a game with Ilara's life as the ultimate stake. Ilara crumpled the photo in her fist, her deep brown eyes blazing with a mixture of terror and sudden, fierce resolve. She knew she had two deadly enemies, Rico, who wanted to destroy Alessandro, and Valentina, who wanted to destroy Ilara herself. She was the one caught between two massive forces, fighting a war she never signed up for. But looking at the photo of her grandfather, Ilara realized she had no choice but to fight back. She had to become as ruthless as the people around her, not for wealth, but for the simple right to live and protect her family. The heavy rain in New York was a mirror of the storm inside the Don's operation. The threat of Valentina's personal vendetta, and the much larger threat of Rico's political coup, had made the penthouse a battlefield of polite smiles and deadly glances. Ilara knew the clock was ticking down to the moment Rico would make his final, desperate move. She was still Alessandro's fiancée and assistant, but now she was also his secret shield, her deep brown eyes constantly searching for the trap she knew was coming. The moment arrived violently. Alessandro received a frantic call late one afternoon, claiming that the final, most sensitive part of the Toronto Bridge real estate deal had gone wrong. The location for resolving the crisis was set, not a boardroom, but a massive, abandoned warehouse near the Brooklyn waterfront. It was a place of high ceilings, deep shadows, and an air of cold, industrial decay. "You will come with me," Alessandro ordered Ilara, his olive skin set in a grim, dangerous mask. He knew this was too simple, too exposed, but he had to see the problem firsthand. He only took Giorgio and Ilara. As they entered the massive, echoing space, Ilara felt the danger closing in. The only light came from the grey afternoon sky struggling through the dirty skylights. The air was cold and damp. They weren't meeting the supposed property seller. They were meeting Rico and Enzo. Rico stood in the center of the warehouse floor, looking triumphant and venomous. He was flanked by Enzo and 3 other hired men Ilara didn't recognize. The sight of Rico, holding a powerful, dark pistol, finally confirmed all of Ilara's terrifying suspicions. "Welcome, Don," Rico sneered, his smooth Italian accent laced with victory. "You look well, considering your reign just ended. Alessandro stopped, his silver-grey eyes blazing with cold fury. This is what all the loyalty was worth, Rico? A cheap coup in a warehouse. It is not cheap, Alessandro. It is necessary, Rico spat back. The lion's eye theft was just a distraction, a simple way to frame your pathetic choice of partner and make you look weak. But the real blow, the one that matters to the council, is financial. Right now, as we stand here, the multi-million euro transfer for the Toronto Bridge deal is failing. The funds are stuck, exposed, and the deadline has passed. You have lost the assets, and you have lost face. The council will view this failure as a sign that you are too distracted by her to lead. He gestured dismissively toward Ilara. A simple failure of logistics. Your new assistant, the clumsy waitress, should have caught it. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't flinch. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the reason she had stayed silent and endured the humiliation. You're wrong, Rico, Ilara said, her voice cutting through the tense air, strong and surprisingly steady. She stepped out from behind Alessandro, the crimson gown and massive diamond ring suddenly irrelevant. Her deep brown eyes held Rico's dark, hateful stare. You only saw the first transfer instruction I filed, Ilara explained simply, keeping the language easy. The one you plan to delay and expose. But because you are so focused on getting rid of Alessandro, you missed rule number 2 of my own personal system, always have a backup. Rico stared at her, genuinely confused. When I realized you had tampered with the initial bank routing, I didn't correct it, Ilara continued. I let it fail, just as you planned. But 3 minutes before that failure, I activated the emergency alternate transfer, a secret, secondary routing I filed through a completely different Canadian bank network. I rerouted the entire sum. The money didn't get stuck, Rico. It arrived at its final destination exactly 10 seconds ago. The deal is complete. Alessandro hasn't lost anything. You have. The shock that washed over Rico's face was total, wiping away his sneer and leaving him looking utterly defeated. Enzo and the other men looked around nervously. Ilara's intelligence had just ruined years of plotting in one single, unexpected move. You. Rico shrieked, his face twisting into a mask of pure, murderous hatred. You ruined everything, you filthy little thief. The financial coup had failed, and now Rico resorted to brute force. He raised the pistol, aiming not at Alessandro, but straight at Ilara's chest. I will take your life before he takes mine. Rico screamed. Alessandro reacted with impossible speed. With a roar of genuine protective fury, he spun Ilara behind him, shoving her hard toward the nearest support column. The sudden, violent movement wasn't about control, it was about saving her life. Boom. The gunshot echoed deafeningly in the massive warehouse. Ilara squeezed her eyes shut, hitting the concrete. But Alessandro was still standing, protected by Giorgio, who had instantly thrown himself forward, taking the bullet in his shoulder. Giorgio, move. Alessandro roared, pulling a concealed pistol from his waistline. The confrontation instantly turned into a chaotic, terrifying battle. Rico and his men opened fire, and Alessandro returned it, his movements fast and precise. Ilara knew she couldn't just hide. She looked around desperately, remembering the lessons she learned when organizing all the building logistics. Her eyes fixed on a massive, heavy support winch running along the ceiling. As Alessandro and Giorgio provided cover, Ilara darted out, running low and fast, ignoring the whistling bullets. She reached a service panel on the wall and yanked it open, her mind racing. She didn't look for wires, she looked for the main power switch for the building's loading equipment. She found it, a thick, red lever, and pulled it down with all her strength. The warehouse was instantly plunged into absolute, pitch-black darkness. Panic erupted among Rico's hired thugs. The sudden darkness, combined with the echoing sounds of the battle, threw them into complete confusion. Now, Giorgio. Alessandro's voice cut through the dark, calm and commanding. In the ensuing chaos, Ilara heard the sounds of quick, decisive action. The fight was short and brutal. When the emergency backup lights finally flickered on, casting a weak, yellow glow over the scene, Rico and his men were all on the floor, disarmed and defeated. Giorgio was breathing heavily, clutching his bleeding shoulder, but alive. Alessandro walked over to Ilara, his pistol still smoking. He shoved the gun back into its holster and immediately checked her, his silver-gray eyes scanning her body for any wound. "Are you hurt, Ilara?" he demanded, his voice rough with spent adrenaline and deep concern. Ilara shook her head, tears of relief and fear blurring her vision. She looked at his face, seeing the raw emotion, the gratitude, the protectiveness, and the undeniable trust. "The bridge," Ilara whispered, pointing to the support column she had hidden behind. "The warning in your coat. Rico was the traitor all along." "He was," Alessandro confirmed, his hand reaching out and gently touching her cheek, brushing away a tear. "But you, Ilara, you were the solution. You saved my life, and you saved my empire with a backup plan and a quick mind." He looked at the defeated Rico, who was now being secured by Giorgio. The loyalty of his guard had been tested and proven true, but the betrayal of his consigliere had been exposed by the intelligence of his captive. In that terrifying moment of near-death, Ilara and Alessandro stood together, their partnership sealed not by a fake engagement or a debt contract, but by shared danger and the profound realization that they truly needed each other. Ilara had risked everything, stepping out of the shadows to become the key to his survival. The chemistry, once forbidden, now felt like a desperate, undeniable truth. The aftermath of the Mafia war in the Brooklyn warehouse was a controlled, grim silence. Rico was secured, his coup crushed not by guns, but by Ilara's superior intellect. Giorgio, though wounded, was stable, his loyalty proven. Alessandro was alive, his position within the organization violently reaffirmed, and he owed his life to the woman he had enslaved. They returned to the New York penthouse, which now felt less like a stage and more like a sanctuary. Alessandro had sent everyone away, leaving only Ilara and himself in the massive, quiet space. The air was heavy with unspoken words, fear, and the undeniable residue of the emotional explosion between them. Alessandro sat behind his desk, not moving, not speaking, his silver-gray eyes fixed on an old, leather-bound journal. It was the only item recovered from Rico's personal safe house, a journal written by the consigliere who betrayed Alessandro's father, the man who killed him on the bridge. "I needed proof," Alessandro finally said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "I knew Rico was repeating the past, but I needed to know the full history. The betrayal of my father was always shrouded in secrecy, always blamed on a phantom partner." He gently pushed the aged journal across the dark wood desk toward Ilara. The phantom partner was not Italian. He was American. The money man who orchestrated the final movement of funds, the one who left my father exposed for execution. Ilara approached the desk slowly, her heart pounding a frantic, warning rhythm. She was exhausted, wearing a simple borrowed t-shirt and sweatpants, her elaborate crimson gown and diamond ring discarded. She looked down at the faded, spidery handwriting in the journal. She stopped at a page marked with a thin, brittle bookmark. The text was in Italian, but her proficiency, honed from her years in Florence, allowed her to read it clearly. It detailed the final movements of the money, the precise moment of betrayal, and the identity of the accomplice. Her deep brown eyes scanned the words, searching, dreading, yet knowing what was coming. The name of the American accomplice was mentioned only once, a casual reference from the betrayer. The move by J. Jenkins was perfect. "He has the clean hands we needed." Ilara swayed, grabbing the edge of the desk for support. Her mind instantly went to her family. Her grandfather was Silas Henderson. Her mother's maiden name was Ilara Jenkins. And then, the crushing, final piece of the puzzle, her absent, never spoken of father. She had always known his last name was Jenkins. Her father, James Jenkins, was the American financial accomplice who had betrayed Alessandro's father. The wine incident in Florence, the clumsy spill that started her entire nightmare, was not an accident of chance. It was a cosmic convergence of fate and generational vendetta. She hadn't accidentally spilled wine on a ruthless mafia don. She, the daughter of the man who betrayed his father, had spilled the symbolic color of blood on the sun. "James Jenkins," Alessandro said, his voice hard, confirming the name Ilara couldn't bring herself to speak. He looked up, his silver-gray eyes, usually so cold, now filled with a devastating blend of pain, fury, and confusion. "The man who destroyed my family, the man who gave my father's throat to the knife of my father's consigliere." Ilara could barely breathe. The weight of her family's dark secret pressed down on her, crushing her own innocence. Her father was not just absent, he was a ghost of betrayal, responsible for the original trauma that shaped the man standing before her, the man she was falling in love with. I didn't know, Ilara whispered, the words catching in her throat, thick with unshed tears. I swear, Don, I never knew my father. He left my mother before I was born. My grandfather never spoke of him. Did you seek me out? Alessandro pressed, rising slowly from the chair. He moved around the desk, stopping just a foot away from her. The chemistry that had sparked in the study, the attraction forged in the warehouse battle, was now threatened by this devastating, generational secret. Was the wine spill part of a calculated plan? Did you come here for a generational vendetta? No, Ilara pleaded, shaking her head vehemently, the denial desperate and absolute. The wine was an accident. The job was for my grandfather's medicine. I was just Ilara, the waitress. I was nothing until you made me this. She gestured wildly at herself. The coincidence, the irony, it's horrific. But I am not my father, Don. I saved your life today. I risked everything to protect you from the man who was repeating my father's mistake. She looked up at him, her deep brown eyes begging for understanding. I am the daughter of your enemy, but I am the woman who refused to let you be betrayed. The choice now lay with Alessandro. He was faced with the ultimate test of loyalty and trust. He had spent his entire life based on fear and control, because of what James Jenkins had done. Now, the daughter of that traitor had shattered his philosophy by proving loyalty and courage when his closest advisor had failed. Alessandro studied her face, the deep mahogany skin, the exhaustion, the raw honesty in her eyes. The urge to trust her was overwhelming, but the pain of his past was a monstrous wall between them. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek, the same gesture of possessiveness he had shown in the study, only this time, it was hesitant, burdened by 2 decades of violence and heartbreak. I believe you, he finally stated, his voice barely audible. But believing you means I have to betray the foundation of my entire life, the absolute need for control. It means I have to trust a Jenkins. The trust and betrayal had reached their climax. Ilara was cleared of being a thief or a spy, but she was revealed to be a link to his deepest trauma. The punishment contract and the fake engagement were suddenly meaningless. Their connection was now terrifyingly real, rooted in a devastating cycle of family secrets that only they could break. Ilara's life had been changed forever, not by the wine incident itself, but by the horrific, cosmic truth of why the wine had to be spilled. The New York penthouse was silent, save for the faint, distant sirens of the city below. The atmosphere was charged, not with the lingering fear of the Mafia war, but with the raw, emotional fallout of the revealed family secret. The torn punishment contract lay discarded. The massive engagement diamond lay on the polished wood of Alessandro's desk next to the damning, century-old journal detailing the betrayal by James Jenkins. Ilara was back in her original, humble olive green dress, the simple fabric a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. She stood before Alessandro, no longer his assistant or fiancée, but the daughter of his family's greatest enemy. She had nothing left to hide, and her deep brown eyes met his silver-gray gaze with weary, determined honesty. The debt is repaid, Ilara, Alessandro stated, his voice quiet, almost frighteningly calm. You saved my life, and you exposed the traitor who was repeating the cycle of betrayal. By any code of honor, the score is settled. You are free to walk away, with your grandfather secure for life. He watched her, waiting for her to run, waiting for her to choose freedom over the danger of his world. And you, Don? Ilara countered, refusing the easy escape. What happens to you? You're letting me leave because I am the daughter of the man who destroyed your father, and every time you look at me, you see the past. You see the reason you can never trust anyone. Alessandro's face hardened, the mask of the ruthless Don snapping back into place. It is the only logical choice. I cannot build an empire on a legacy of deceit. But you can build it on love, Alessandro, Ilara pressed, stepping forward. She was challenging the foundation of his existence, the fear that had been her captor. You told me you run your life based on fear, to avoid the fate of your father. But your fear almost killed you. You trusted Rico because he fit the mold of the loyal advisor, and you nearly died. You ignored me because I was the debt, the outside threat, and I was the only person who saved you. She walked to the desk, picked up the old leather journal, and tossed it to him. I am not my father, Ilara declared, her voice gaining strength. But I understand your pain. You have two choices. You can cling to that old code of vengeance, destroy me, and prove that you are just as trapped by the past as your father was. Or you can use your power to forgive, to break the cycle, and prove that you are stronger than your enemies. You saved my life, Alessandro. Now it's my turn to save yours, from yourself. The silence that followed was immense. Alessandro held the journal, his knuckles white, looking from the faded handwriting of his father's betrayer to Ilara's challenging, unwavering gaze. He was being asked to dismantle the carefully constructed fortress of control he had lived in for decades. Finally, Alessandro slowly, deliberately, placed the journal back on the desk. He looked at Ilara, and the ice in his silver eyes melted, revealing a raw, protective intensity. You are relentless, he murmured, a faint hint of admiration entering his voice. He walked to a steel safe hidden behind a painting. He opened it, revealing not just documents, but a vast array of gold, emeralds, and historical artifacts, including the glittering, magnificent lion's eye medallion. He pulled out the lion's eye, the heavy gold symbol of the family's power. He didn't offer it to her, but instead, he reached deep into the safe and pulled out a plain, silver digital recorder. You proved your loyalty with logistics, Ilara, he said. But what was the true, final test? He pressed play on the recorder. A clean, digitally recorded conversation filled the room, a conversation between Rico and another man, planning the frame. But the voice of the other man wasn't Enzo. It was Valentina, Alessandro's obsessive ex-lover. Valentina's voice, he trusts the little waitress because she's clumsy. Frame her with the lion's eye. Make her disappearance personal, not business. That will draw Alessandro's attention. Rico's voice, and the old man? The grandfather. Valentina's voice, threaten the old man. Make her desperate. That's the only way to get her to crack. The shocking final twist, Ilara wasn't just dealing with a political coup, she was dealing with a dual-layered plot. Rico had handled the financial end, but Valentina, driven by jealousy and a need for revenge, had orchestrated the personal framing, the lion's eye theft, and the threats against Ilara's grandfather. Rico was the pawn, Alessandro explained, his voice hard. Valentina was the true architect, using Rico's greed and the secret of my father's past to manipulate the entire situation. They were working together. He looked at the recorder, then at Ilara. I knew the lion's eye frame was too perfect. I had this recording of Valentina's contact, a backup, in case she ever became a threat. But I couldn't be sure until you challenged me and saved my life in that warehouse. He stepped toward her, holding the recorder, then tossing it onto the desk. He closed the distance between them, his hands reaching for her face, his thumbs gently brushing her cheekbones. My revenge is handled. My empire is safe, Alessandro declared, his silver eyes dark and intense. The debt is paid. The cycles of revenge end now. He didn't need the grand gesture of the diamond or the title of fiancé. He needed the raw truth. He was choosing to trust the daughter of his enemy over the ghost of his past, a decision that fundamentally changed the trajectory of his dangerous life. You came into my life as a mistake, Ilara, he murmured, his voice thick with a new kind of possessiveness. And you have become the one thing I cannot live without. The risk you pose is greater than any rival, but the reward is worth the price. He kissed her, a deep, passionate claiming that wasn't a punishment, but a surrender. As the kiss broke, Ilara looked up at him, no longer seeing the ruthless Don, but the complicated, powerful man she had helped free from his own trauma. The danger was not gone, it was simply closer now. The council will not accept me easily, Ilara warned, accepting her new role with steely resolve. And Valentina is still out there, waiting for her moment. Alessandro smiled, a dark, dangerous promise flickering in his eyes. Let them wait. We are no longer playing their game, Mia Consigliera. We are rewriting the rules. He took the lion's eye medallion, bypassed her neck, and slipped it onto his own silver chain, right next to the small one she had noticed before. The ancient symbol of power now rested against his heart, a physical testament to the fact that his legacy was bound not to the past, but to the future he had chosen with Ilara. They stood together, the powerful Don and his unlikely partner, ready to face an empire that didn't know the rules had changed, leaving their fate and their forbidden love poised thrillingly on the edge of a new, dangerous dawn.